My in-laws announced at Thanksgiving they were reallocating the beach house my husband and I paid off to his brother. You two don't have kids yet. You don't need the space. I excused myself from the table, went to the bathroom, made 3 calls, came back and finished my meal. The next morning, a moving truck arrived, but it wasn't there for the brother. It was there for everything my husband and I had ever paid for, down to the kitchen tiles. My name is Ava. I'm 33 years old, and I'm a patrol officer with the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit, which means, among other things, that I am professionally trained to stay calm in situations that would make most people come apart completely. I've talked down a man with a kitchen knife while his wife stood behind him shaking. I've delivered news that ends people's entire worlds. Composure stopped being a skill years ago. It became something closer to a bone structure. So when my mother-in-law looked down the length of her Thanksgiving table, the one I had set, with the napkins I'd brought from Brooklyn, the centerpiece I'd arranged at 6 in the morning before anyone else was awake, and announced in a voice usually reserved for mild weather observations that she and my father-in-law had decided to reallocate the beach house that my husband and I had spent 4 years paying off to his brother Shepard. Because we don't have kids yet and don't really need the space, I put down my fork, folded my napkin, excused myself politely, and went to the bathroom. I want to tell you what happened in that bathroom. And I want to tell you what happened the next morning, when a moving truck pulled up outside. But let me back up first. Eli grew up in a house in coastal Connecticut where love was distributed on a sliding scale, with the amounts varying significantly depending on who you were and what you'd recently accomplished. His parents, Walt and Lorraine, were not cruel people. I want to be clear about that, because this story is not about villains. Walt sold commercial real estate and coached youth soccer for a decade. Lorraine made extraordinary pies, kept an immaculate garden, and had a laugh that filled a room. By any external measure, lovely people. They also had 2 sons who occupied very different positions in the family architecture. Eli was the older one. The steady one. The one who got good grades without being asked, who fixed the gutters when Walt's back gave out, who called every Sunday and remembered to ask follow-up questions about things his mother had mentioned the week before. At 26, he sat down with his parents over coffee and walked them through a retirement savings plan because he'd quietly noticed the numbers weren't working. No fanfare. No expectation of acknowledgement. That was simply how Eli moved through the world, solving problems before they became crises, taking up only as much space as needed. Shepard was the younger one. Shepard was the sun around which the household orbited. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because it's accurate. Shepard was charming the way certain people are charming, like a golden retriever who has learned to open the refrigerator. You couldn't stay angry because he never meant harm, and he genuinely never noticed when harm had occurred. He dropped out of one college, launched 3 businesses that each lasted approximately 1 fiscal quarter, borrowed money from his parents enough times that Walt had a separate account he called his Shepard Fund. And yet, at every single family gathering, every Christmas, every Easter, Shepard was the one they talked about most, his new idea, his potential, the pivot he was planning. Walt would lean back and say, "That kid is going to figure it out," in the tone of a man watching a promising horse race. Eli had figured it out a decade ago. Nobody felt the need to discuss it. The examples accumulated the way small things do, each one too minor to mention alone. Devastating in accumulation. Shepard's 30th birthday. Lorraine reserved a private dining room, invited 20 people, ordered a custom cake. Eli's 33rd birthday, 6 weeks earlier that same year. A 4-minute phone call from Walt that ended with, "Your mother wants to know if you're coming for Easter." I watched Eli's face during that call. He was standing in our kitchen in Cobble Hill, and his expression did something small and practiced, an internal closing of a curtain, the kind you only develop if you've been doing it for years. The beach house had come from Eli's grandmother Ruthie, who left it to Lorraine with the explicit hope that the family would enjoy it together. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a view of the water that made you feel briefly and convincingly that everything would be all right. It needed real work when Ruthie passed. Eli and I had just gotten married, and we decided together to take it on. We replaced the roof. We refinished the floors. We renovated the kitchen, including the tiles, hand-selected from a supplier in New Jersey on a long Saturday that left us both sunburned and inexplicably pleased with ourselves. We paid the property taxes every year. We paid off the remaining mortgage. I remember the night exactly. Our kitchen table in Brooklyn, takeout containers pushed aside, Eli and me splitting the final payment down the middle on a legal pad. The way we did everything. In exchange, we used the house 2 weeks in July and once in the fall. We never charged Shepard when he used it, which was often, including once for what I can only describe as a wellness retreat he organized for himself and 5 friends. The kitchen required a full Saturday of cleaning afterward. I sat on the porch with iced tea and managed my internal monologue the way I'd been trained to manage it at work. I've been on the job since 24, started in the Bronx, worked my way into financial crimes, and discovered I had a particular talent for reading paper trails, bank records, transfer histories, property documents. There's almost always one document in a stack of 2,000 that tells the real story, and finding it is something close to a calling. My partner is Briggs, Declan Briggs, 6'3", collects vintage sneakers, makes the best coffee in the precinct on a machine he brought from home, and guards with institutional ferocity. My supervisor is Lieutenant Sloan, Diane Sloan. Small, precise, the kind of woman who once delivered a full briefing with a broken finger without mentioning the finger. She told me twice that I have good instincts. The first time, I wrote it in my journal. The second time, I believed her. Eli and I live in a second-floor apartment in Cobble Hill with large windows and a radiator that makes a sound like a small, polite argument every February. We have a cat named Roosevelt who treats the afternoon sun as a personal entitlement. My closest friend outside work is Macaulay, Tully Macaulay, a forensic accountant who once identified fraud at a nonprofit from across a dinner table by watching the executive director's posture. She has a specific expression she makes when she thinks I'm tolerating something I shouldn't be. I know it well. My life was genuinely good. The family dynamic was the thing I managed, not the thing I led with. There was a crystallizing moment before Thanksgiving. There always is. A Sunday in March, 8 months earlier. Eli and I drove up to Connecticut for what Lorraine called a family lunch. Shepard was there with a woman named Paige I'd never met. Lorraine had made a roast. The table was set with the embroidered linen tablecloth that I had noticed over 5 years only came out for what Lorraine considered significant occasions. It had not appeared for the lunch where Eli announced his promotion. It had not appeared when we shared that we'd finished paying off the beach house. It had not appeared for my birthday lunch the previous year, at which I received a gift card in an envelope that still had the price sticker on it. The tablecloth was out because Paige was there. Because Shepard had brought someone home, and Walt and Lorraine were lighting flares. What happened during lunch was that Lorraine said, passing the rolls, "We're thinking of moving the beach house into the family property trust. Make everything cleaner." Eli said, "Sure, that makes sense." The man who had spent 4 years and significant earnings repairing a house from his own family said it and passed the butter. I kept my face still. I drove home mostly quiet. Eli squeezed my hand at a red light on the Merritt Parkway. I told myself it was fine. That was the first lie. Thanksgiving. I arrived Tuesday before the holiday, took 2 days off work specifically to help Lorraine prepare. I brought my own knives. I brought groceries, including a heritage turkey I'd ordered 4 weeks in advance from a farm upstate, because Lorraine had mentioned once, years ago, that she'd always wanted to try one. I hadn't told her I was ordering it. I had just shown up with it. That was how I operated in this family. Shepard arrived Thanksgiving morning, in time for coffee. The table seated 12. Walt at the head, Lorraine at the other end, Eli to my left, Shepard across from us with Paige. The meal went well. The turkey was the best thing on the table and everyone said so, and Lorraine accepted the compliment graciously, which I observed and chose to interpret charitably. It was after the main course, in that soft window between dinner and pie, that Walt cleared his throat. Lorraine and I have been thinking about the beach house situation. Eli looked up. Walt said they'd been talking with their estate attorney. New information, delivered casually as though mentioned before, and that given the family circumstances, it made sense to formalize the property arrangements. Shepard and Paige were, after all, getting serious. Walt actually used that phrase. Paige looked like she was trying to determine if she was included in this conversation or observing it from outside. I had some sympathy for her in that moment. Walt said, "We're thinking of reallocating the beach house to Shepard. You two don't have kids yet, and honestly, you don't need the space. Shepard could use a stable home base. Here's what I want you to understand about the next 10 seconds. In my work, I have been in situations where time slows and you become aware of every physical detail simultaneously. I was aware of Eli's fork, held still over his plate. I was aware of Lorraine adjusting her napkin. I was aware of Paige's hand moving toward Shepard's arm and then stopping. And I was aware of the exact dollar amount Eli and I had spent on that house. I keep receipts. It is not a personality quirk, it is a professional habit. I knew the number to the dollar, including the kitchen tiles I had driven to New Jersey to select because Lorraine had mentioned once that she liked a particular style. I said, "Excuse me for just a moment." I put my napkin down, pushed my chair back, walked to the bathroom down the hall, closed the door, turned on the faucet, because I understand acoustics and I know it carries through a house, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to a real estate attorney I knew professionally, who owed me a favor of the kind that means they pick up on a holiday. The second was to a moving company that offered emergency weekend scheduling. The third was to Eli's cell phone. He picked up after 2 rings. I said, "I need you to stay calm and finish your meal. I'll explain everything tonight." A pause. Then, "Okay, 8 years of marriage is its own language." I turned off the faucet, touched up my lipstick, walked back to the table, and finished my meal. I had a second piece of pie. It was good. Lorraine's pies always were. I said nothing more about the beach house. Neither did Eli. The morning after Thanksgiving, while Walt and Lorraine were still in their bedrooms, we'd stayed the night because we'd driven from Brooklyn, because that is the kind of detail that tells you everything about how a family operates. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and pulled up the county property records on my phone. The trust Lorraine had mentioned in March, filed 6 weeks after that lunch. Eli's name was not on it. My name was certainly not on it. The property had been transferred into a trust whose only named beneficiaries were Walt, Lorraine, and Shepard. Our money, our labor, our tiles. Legally, all of it had passed into a document we had never seen and never been asked to sign at a time when we were still making the payments. The final mortgage payment had been made in February. The trust had been filed in April. I sat with that for a while. Then I called the moving company and confirmed the Saturday morning time slot. The truck arrived at 8 o'clock. It was there for everything Eli and I had contributed over 4 years. The outdoor dining furniture, the bedroom dresser we'd refinished together, the living room rug, the curtains, the kitchen fixtures, and yes, the tiles. My attorney had been clear. Anything not part of the original structure was legally removable personal property, and I had the receipts to prove provenance on every single item. Walt came out in his bathrobe at 8:15. He stood on the driveway looking at the truck, then at me, with the expression of a man who had not anticipated this sequence of events. I said, "Good morning, Walt. We're picking up our property. I have the receipts if you'd like to go over them." He said nothing. He went back inside. It took 3 hours. I was very polite to the movers. Eli and I drove back to Brooklyn with the truck following us and talked for most of the afternoon. Not an easy conversation. Eli processes in long, slow cycles, incrementally, inevitably, and he needed space to move through it. I gave him the space. I laid out everything I'd found the way I would lay out a case. The trust documents, the filing dates, the timeline, not with emotion. With sequence. Here is what happened, here is when. Here's the documentation. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then, I knew. Not about the trust specifically, but I knew something. I told him I knew he knew. He said, "I thought if I just kept doing everything right." I said, "I know." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We stopped calling. Both of us. It was an unusual experience for Eli, who had called every Sunday for his entire adult life. The first Sunday without a call, he made elaborate breakfast instead, the kind that takes an hour and uses 4 pans. Roosevelt supervised from the counter. I sat at the table and watched him cook, and the apartment was quiet in the specific way that quiet is when something heavy has finally been set down. Walt called on day 12. Lorraine on day 15. We watched their names appear and made the mutual decision, without discussing it, not to answer. Day 25, Shepard called Eli. Eli answered. Shepard said something had come up with the logistics of the beach house. Paige wanted to spend Christmas there, and there was a question about whether the property tax was current. The tax had been paid in February. By us. On a property since transferred into a trust that excluded us. Eli said, "We don't own that property anymore. You'll have to ask Mom and Dad." Then he hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment, and I watched something realign in his face, something that had been held at a slight angle for decades clicking quietly into place. I didn't say anything. Some things are better left in the silence where they land. The weeks that followed were some of the best in recent memory. There is a version of yourself available on the other side of no longer spending energy on something that's been quietly taking it. I got to meet mine. At work, I closed 2 stalled cases in 1 month. Briggs noticed, which means he refilled my coffee without being asked and said solid week, which in his vocabulary is a standing ovation. Lieutenant Sloan called me in, sat across her immaculate desk and said, "You've been different this month. Sharper. I want to give you the Harmon file. A multi-year fraud case waiting for patience and instinct." She said this with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and I filed it in the mental folder I keep for things I return to when I need reminding. I started seeing Dr. Leland in December. She had an office on the Upper West Side that smelled like cedar, a collection of succulents she clearly tended with great care, and reading glasses on a beaded chain she touched occasionally while listening. the way some people reach for a necklace when they're paying close attention. Third session, I walked through the whole thing. When I finished, Dr. Leland was quiet for a moment. Then, what you're describing isn't only a betrayal. It's a system that was working exactly as designed. You were the infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't need acknowledgement. It just needs to function. I sat with that. The question isn't whether they valued you, she said. The question is whether you built your life to require their acknowledgement of that value. I thought about the Sunday calls, the heritage turkey, the tiles I'd driven to New Jersey to select for a house filed legally in someone else's name. All the ways Eli and I had arranged ourselves around people who had arranged themselves around a different center. I said, I think I've been doing maintenance on a relationship that was filed in someone else's name. She smiled, small, genuine. That's a very precise way to put it. A good therapeutic insight doesn't solve anything. It removes the confusion from the equation and leaves you with the actual situation, clear and workable. I didn't need Walt and Lorraine to understand what they'd done. I didn't need Shepard to apologize. I just needed to stop organizing my behavior around people who didn't organize theirs around me. Simple, not easy. Simple. Macaulay came over the second Friday in December with takeout, settled onto my couch and said, I've been waiting for this. I never said anything because it wasn't mine to say, but I've watched you manage that family for years the way you manage a case. Evidence, patience, strategy, and they have never once managed you like a person. I told her that was the most accurate thing anyone had said to me in months. She said, also the turkey thing. You drove upstate for a turkey, Ava. It was a very good turkey. Eli, for his part, went through his own version of this. Slower, quieter, more interior. He started running mornings along the waterfront. He called Ruthie's closest friend, a woman named Rosalind in her late 70s, who had known him since he was small. He came home from one of those calls and walked into the kitchen and said, Rosalind told me Ruthie specifically said, at a family dinner 6 years ago, that the house was meant for me, not the family generally. For me. He paused. Rosalind kept the card Ruthie wrote to accompany the original deed. She kept it because she thought it might matter someday. I said, do you want to think about what to do with that? He said, yes, I think I do. Walt called in late January. Not to apologize, to explain. I recognized the architecture from Eli's description, a person narrating events to cast themselves as reasonable. Walt said Lorraine had been worried about the taxes, that they'd thought Eli and I, given our situation, which apparently meant our lack of children and our apparent self-sufficiency, were in a position where the beach house was more financial asset than sentimental one. The attorney had made it seem clean. Eli read me the text he drafted in response. 3 sentences. I want to meet in person. There are things I need to say. I'll come to you. Tell me a date that works. I told him it was exactly right. The meeting happened at Walt and Lorraine's house on a Saturday in February. I drove us up from Brooklyn in the early morning, the city quiet behind us. Eli had a folder, I had a folder. Mine was thicker. Eli had been specific about that, and for once Walt and Lorraine complied without argument, which told me they understood something significant was coming. Eli started. Steady in a way I recognized as real personal effort, because I knew how much it cost him to speak plainly to his parents about something that mattered. He said, I want to walk you through what happened, because I think there's a version where you genuinely don't know the full picture, and I'd rather give you the chance to know it before I decide what to do next. He went through it. The years of payments. The roof. The floors. The mortgage payoff date. He had a clear spreadsheet. Not aggressive, just organized. And set it on the table without drama. Then, the trust was filed 2 months after we made the final mortgage payment. I found that out the morning after Thanksgiving. I'd like to know if you knew the timing when you made the announcement at dinner. Walt said, we talked to an attorney, Eli. It wasn't. Eli said, I'm not asking what the attorney said. I'm asking if you knew the timing. Silence. Lorraine said, we thought it was all family property anyway. I spoke for the first time. Lorraine, we have receipts for every item we contributed, including the kitchen fixtures. We also have a letter from Rosalind and a card in Ruthie's handwriting, indicating the house was intended specifically for Eli. I set the copy on the table. I mentioned that not as a threat, but because I think you should know what the actual record looks like. Lorraine looked at the card. She recognized the handwriting. Something crossed her face. Real, unguarded, not deflection. Her eyes stayed on it. Walt said, we made a mistake. Eli looked at him. Hands flat on the table. We made a mistake. With the timing, with how we handled it. I can see that. It was not everything. It did not cover the Sunday calls taken for granted, the promotions acknowledged in 3 words, while Shepard's schemes were discussed for hours, every time Eli had been present. And somehow beside the point. It was not a full reckoning with the shape of how they had raised 2 sons to occupy different amounts of space in the same house. But it was real. Walt, who communicated primarily through real estate metaphors and sports commentary, said we made a mistake with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on his son's face. That was not nothing, Lorraine cried. Quietly, without performance. A few tears she wiped quickly and didn't explain. She said, I didn't know the card existed. I thought I didn't know she'd written it down. I believed her. This is the part people don't expect me to say. But in my experience, most family damage is not orchestrated. It accumulates. 1,000 small assumptions that calcify over decades into something that looks deliberate from outside, but is, from inside, just the unexamined architecture of how a family taught itself to see. Before we left, I said, we're not here because we need you to fix this. We're here because you deserved the chance to know what happened. What comes next is up to you. We drove back to Brooklyn mostly quiet. The skyline appeared for a moment on the BQE, familiar, indifferent in the way only New York can be, and Eli held my hand at the merge, where the traffic always slows. This time, I squeezed back. That was several months ago. The beach house is in a legal process I won't detail here, because it is still in motion, and because Rosalind is 78 years old and absolutely certain about what that card says. I have learned to trust the certainty of women her age who kept a piece of paper for 6 years because they thought it might matter someday. Walt has called Eli 3 times since February. Short, slightly formal calls, the kind that happen when people are searching for a new register for a relationship they've been using incorrectly. Something like progress. Lorraine came over in March with a pie. She and I sat in the Cobble Hill kitchen while Eli was on a call, and she said, I didn't know it had added up to so much. I think she meant the money. I think she might have also meant other things. I didn't push. We ate pie, and it was not the reconciliation that happens at the end of movies. But it was something that might grow into one, given enough time. Shepard has not called. Briggs and I closed the Harmon case in April. Lieutenant Sloan shook my hand. In her emotional vocabulary, a standing ovation. We went out for drinks after, the whole unit, and Briggs raised his glass and said, to Reyes, which is my last name, and a room full of people who had watched me work echoed it back. The apartment windows still catch the afternoon light the way they always have. Roosevelt has discovered a new patch of sun near the radiator. Eli finished his running program and moved on to something more ambitious, which he discusses with an enthusiasm I find endearing and slightly alarming. Macaulay comes for dinner most second Thursdays and argues cooking techniques with Eli, with a warmth that means she is family in the way that actually counts. Last week, Eli and I were on the fire escape after dinner. Wine, the sound of Cobble Hill doing its evening work below us, the bridge visible in the distance, and he said, not about anything in particular. I used to spend so much energy trying to be seen by them that I didn't really look at what I already had. I told him I knew exactly what he meant. My name is Ava Reyes. I'm 33 years old and I work financial crimes at the NYPD's 5th Precinct in New York City. I keep receipts. I read documents carefully. I know the difference between a system functioning as designed and a system functioning as intended, and I have learned, slowly, and then all at once, that those 2 things are not always the same. I went to the bathroom at Thanksgiving. I made 3 calls. I came back and finished my meal. I don't regret a single thing about how that played out. Not even the tiles.